Over the past 60 years, Paul McCartney has written some of pop music's most timeless songs. And among all the experimentation and innovation of Revolver came Here, There and Everywhere. It's a song that still feels special today, and one which John Lennon later described as one of his favourite Beatles songs. Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video I want to look at what makes Here, There and Everywhere such a great song, and how its lyrics, harmonies and subtle studio techniques help create one of the most timeless songs of the Beatles' career. In May 1966, Beach Boys member Bruce Johnson and former Beatles press officer Derek Taylor arrived in London with an acetate of Pet Sounds. On May the 19th, just days after its US release, but more than a month before it appeared in Britain, Johnson and Taylor played the album privately at least twice at the Waldorf Hotel to musicians and journalists, including John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Paul later said that the Beatles were freaked out by Pet Sounds, and it's not difficult to hear why. In early June 1966, Paul arrived at John's house for a writing session, only to discover that John was still asleep. So he made himself a cup of tea, sat outside by the swimming pool with his guitar, and started writing. By the time John finally woke up, Paul said that he had pretty much written the song. And you can almost hear that atmosphere in the finished recording. Nothing about the song feels rushed or overdramatic. Everything just flows naturally from beginning to end.
To lead a better life, I need my love to be here.
It's such a simple line, but it's also much bigger than a normal pop lyric. Paul isn't just singing about missing someone, he's talking about how love itself can change the way life feels. And like all great songs, people from completely different generations still connect with it nearly 60 years later. Unlike some Beatles songs, which feel completely tied to the time or album they came from, Here, There and Everywhere works more like a standard. Paul later said that jazz musicians were especially drawn to the song because of the chord structure. Interestingly, Paul's handwritten lyrics show he was still refining exactly how he wanted the song to feel. You can see him slightly adjusting words and phrases as he searches for exactly the right rhythm for the lyric. For example, on this line, he gives himself the option of ending it with here, near, or there. Another thing that stands out about Here, There and Everywhere is how calm and unforced the emotion feels.
Ah, look at all the lonely people.
Unlike a song like Eleanor Rigby, there's very little drama in the lyric. Paul isn't telling a story or building towards a big emotional moment. The whole thing just seems to float along very naturally. Paul then began listening repeatedly to Pet Sounds, and you can absolutely hear its influence on Here, There and Everywhere, especially on songs like this. Not because Paul copied it, musically the songs are actually very different. God Only Knows creates this huge emotional sound through layers of instruments and harmonies, whereas Here, There and Everywhere is much more understated. There's much more space in the arrangement, and everything feels lighter and more delicate. But emotionally, the songs are surprisingly similar. Neither really behaves like a regular pop love song. They're both trying to express something deeper and more universal. Rubber Soul had a huge impact on Brian Wilson and helped inspire Pet Sounds. Then Paul heard Pet Sounds and wrote Here, There and Everywhere. So for a short period in 1965 and 1966, the Beatles and the Beach Boys were pushing each other creatively in real time. And it's hard not to wonder where that exchange might have gone next had Brian Wilson completed Smile, and the two groups continued challenging each other artistically. And nowhere is that influence clearer than in the harmonies. The Beatles had already used harmonies brilliantly before this, of course.
This boy wouldn't mind the pain.
Songs like This Boy, If I Fell and Nowhere Man already showed how sophisticated their vocal arrangements could be. But Here, There and Everywhere feels different. This floating style of Beatles harmony singing, although sounding effortless, actually took 3 recording sessions across several days to get right. What's also fascinating is how sparse the actual recording is. When people think of Revolver, they usually think of tape loops, backward sounds and studio experimentation. But Here, There and Everywhere creates its effect in a much quieter and more restrained way. There really isn't that much there. There's Paul's softly played Epiphone Casino guitar, bass, some very restrained percussion and layered vocals. Even George's guitar is used very sparingly. And unlike many Beatles vocals from this time, which used artificial double tracking, Paul manually double tracked the lead vocal by singing the part twice. Paul later said that he sang the song in what he called an almost falsetto voice, and he even described it as his Marianne Faithfull impression. The vocal was then slightly sped up by running the tape machine a little slower during recording. It's only a subtle effect, but it gives Paul's voice a slightly lighter and softer quality, which really suits the mood of the song. Its position on the album is interesting too, appearing directly between Love You To and Yellow Submarine. So often on Beatles albums, Paul's songs seem to act like emotional reset points, while everything around them pushes forwards. The song's sophistication was recognised almost immediately, and not just by critics writing about Revolver at the time. Fellow Liverpool group The Foremost became the first artist to cover it less than a year later. Although known mainly as an album track, Here, There and Everywhere was released as the B-side to Good Day Sunshine in India, and is, as far as anyone knows, the final Beatles song released commercially on 78 anywhere in the world. After Yesterday, Here, There and Everywhere was one of the Beatles songs Paul seemed most drawn back to when he started playing live again in the early 1990s, which perhaps says something about how strongly he rated the song. Interestingly, when Paul re-recorded Here, There and Everywhere for Give My Regards to Broad Street in 1984, he changed the song's opening line. Instead of a small change, but it completely alters the emotional meaning of the song. Interestingly, Paul never seems to have explained why he changed the lyric, and in later live performances, he returned to the original version again. Stripped-back versions of the song released over the years have given listeners a rare chance to hear how beautifully constructed Here, There and Everywhere really is. Most notably, the CD single for Real Love included Take 7, recorded on June 16, 1966, while the 2022 Revolver Deluxe box set featured the earlier Take 6, with its more exposed arrangement and vocals. But what makes this song especially moving to Paul is that he remembers John Lennon praising it. To this day, he still seems genuinely touched by the memory of John recognising its quality.
But it was Here, There and Everywhere was one of my songs on it. And remember John sort of, just when it finishes, that's a really good song, that. I love that song. And I was like, yes, he likes it. You know, I've remembered it to this day. It's pathetic, really.
And perhaps that's one reason the song remained so special to Paul over the years. Not because of the writing or the recording, but because he remembered John Lennon telling him how good it was. Let me know your thoughts on Here, There and Everywhere, and whether you think it's one of, or perhaps even the greatest of Paul McCartney's ballads. I'll be back next weekend with my review of Paul's new album, so I hope you'll join me for that. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.
Let me
me know, honey, how you feel. Tell the truth now, is love real?
If you think this was potty, wait till you see next week's adventures.